Hi everybody, it's Alan Denman here, author, screenwriter, filmmaker and writing coach. Welcome to the hero's journey, bringing you thoughts, insights and inspiration on the art of storytelling. Well, we've been looking at the hero's journey as a story model, and I've also been pointing out that the hero's journey is not just story, it is actually a model for life itself. And we're going to move on to look at something this week, one section or one stage of the hero's journey known as the Supreme Ordeal. Sounds very grand, and it is a really important point, and I will relate this sort of stage of the hero's journey to our own lives as well, and I hope it will be illuminating for you. But before we do that, I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about structure. Now, really structure underpins story. And when I was studying screenwriting emphasizes structure a great deal. And the most common structural model for screenwriters is the three-act structure, 1, 2, 3. And the pattern of 3 is a pretty universal pattern. It's found in nature, we say third time lucky, and, there's lots of ways that this appears. And the idea of a three-act screenplay is, the first act is really sort of setting the story or setting up the story. The second act, the middle act, is about the development and increasing complications. And the third act is about the resolution of the conflict. So it's very simple, 1, 2, 3. And I realized when I was doing a lot of screenwriting and learning and teaching screenwriting that you could apply this even to a scene in a screenplay. So let me give you an example. Rather than just writing a scene like, well, a man comes in a room. So a man comes in a room, right? That's part 1. Part 2, he starts to look around for something. And part 3, he finds something maybe hidden at the back of a shelf or somewhere. That's a 1, 2, 3 pattern. And you can use this sort of pattern for writing chapters as well in a novel. How does a chapter begin? How does it develop? And how does it conclude? And of course, if you're only part of the way through a story and you're not writing the last chapter, then you leave a little hook at the end of that chapter to make sure it links into the next chapter as well. So it's like kind of a weaving process, which is I really like, and I like structure a great deal. And so one of the big things about the three-act structure in screenwriting, and by the way, there are something like over 1,200 books available on screenwriting, and it is a great source if you want to learn more about storytelling, characterization, plot, structure, theme, and so forth. Now, whether you're going to write screenplays or not, which are very tricky things to write well, but you can apply the same principles and the same rules of craft to novel writing and to short story writing as well. So one of the things about the three-act structure is that there is a long middle act. And there's something in the middle act known as the midpoint. And one of the challenges for screenwriters is that the middle act can be up to an hour long. And that's where the story can sag. You can get bored. I was watching a film last night at the local cinema, and I was very aware I was bored in the middle, and I was waiting for it to pick up to head into the final act where the conflict was going to be resolved. It was a film called Wicked Little Letters, by the way, if anybody's seen that. I don't know whether you felt bored in the middle. But anyway, there's this thing in screenwriting theory that in the middle act, there's something known as the midpoint. And it's not talked about very much, but I always thought the midpoint is a bit like when you're crossing a bridge, and the midpoint is when you're in the middle and it's too late to go back. You have to go on. But what is it that propels the hero or protagonist on at that midpoint? And then as I got into the hero's journey, I started to kind of see the different stages. And this is where we come to the Supreme Ordeal. Basically, the idea in the hero's journey model is that the Supreme Ordeal is also known as the meeting with death. This is a death and rebirth experience in the middle that leads or inspires or motivates the hero or protagonist to carry on to the end. Now, what does this look like? What is death and rebirth? This can take many, many forms. It could be literally the death of a relationship, the death of a friendship, something that you've relied on up until that point, and now you're alone. But what it means is you have to find the resources to carry on your own. Or it could be an illness that, creates that near death or death and rebirth experience. And I've certainly had that many times. So I've had pneumonia and various other illnesses and accidents and things like that. And, you can kind of learn, because what's happening in that state of illness, your body is releasing stuff, and you're also probably at a kind of subconscious level appraising where you've been, why are you ill, what's caused this, what's stress, what about your lifestyle, and then you may then come out of that different to when you came in. So that can also be a death and rebirth experience. It could be the death of an idea, a death of a religious faith, that you give up your faith at that point, but you find something else instead, something even greater. So you see, death and rebirth can have many, many applications. It means many things, but it is this point in the story where a character has to give up something and, carry on, but with a kind of renewed, because the ancient idea of death is that it's always followed by rebirth. So I would say here now, looking at this story model, the Supreme Ordeal, the meeting with death, maybe you might like to think about your own life and a serious illness you've had, or a big disruption, or a sudden parting, or even giving up a place where you say, well, it's time now to leave this town and move somewhere else. So that's a kind of, or can be a kind of, death and rebirth. So think about your own life as well, and see if this idea of death and rebirth, applies to you, because I think this is a pattern that we all experience. Obviously, there's the big pattern, which is we're born and we grow up and we get older and then we die. But then there's many kind of smaller deaths and rebirths along the way. And I would say, to look at story, and to whether you're looking at a film or reading a novel, ask yourself, is there a midpoint? Is there a central kind of experience in which the hero or protagonist undergoes a transformation? And I think that's a good story if it's got that, because one of the things that this does, this energizes the center, or the middle section of the story, which is traditionally where things can really waver and drop and sag. So think about that as well. And, why don't you, if you're listening, if you're not a writer already, think about applying this to one of your stories. Just take a short story, so nothing as big as a novel. Novels take a long time to write, but a short story, and what happens in the middle of that story. So you could even, here's a tip, begin your story from the death and rebirth moment, or in the middle of your story, and work backwards to the beginning and forwards to the conclusion. And that's a different approach. And I don't know any other teacher of screenwriting or creative writing or storytelling that's ever said that. But I think that's a very interesting idea. And on that note, I'm going to stop there. Hope that was interesting. And if you like this, please subscribe and send me a message by all means. Okay, have a great week. That's it. Bye-bye.